We are now going to be walking through the 4s to 7s or lower realm of the Minor Arcana in the Spirit Keeper's Tarot deck, the deck that I drew. The first province of the lower realm is the realm of 4s, and we begin with the 4 of Scepters. Fire, water, air, and earth is the order that we're going in terms of the 4 worlds or the 4 dominions within each of the realms. And we have the 4 of Scepters, 4 of Wands, the Demiurge. This is from the Platonic concept of not a godlike figure, but then, yeah, kind of, who is also a producer, an artisan, an architect of the physical order and, the architecture, the blueprints of the universe, of the physical universe. So this is the materialized world. And we're talking about a mason, remember the 3 of Orbs, which comes before the 4 of Scepters, with the Empyrean court in between as the messengers going back and forth between those realms that manifests. This is what the Mason is producing. And here the drawing is from the Holy Roman Empire. I hope this card, the 4 of Wands, still gives off that sense of domestic harmony that we often read into the 4 of Wands card in the tarot. Though here I've also used an allegory where the female in blue with the dove, this is the representation of peace, and then the female with the bow and arrow and the ram and wearing red in armor is an allegory for war. So peace and war together hold up this wheel, which represents the wheel of life in a sense. But you also see that this is the structure in the 4 of Wands in the thought. The Platonian concept, Plato's concept of the Demiurge, is more benevolent than perhaps the Gnostic representation or expression of the Demiurge. I think it's both at the same time, and it works itself into the mundane, practical reading of the 4 of Scepters or 4 of Wands card in everyday readings. When you think about domestic bliss, when you think about domestication itself, there is a sense of containment, right? And just like when you create a physical universe, you're taking something that was intangible and fluid and free form and now causing this free form spirit essence to be contained, dare I say, entrapped into a physical constraint. And that is perhaps why in Gnosticism or some branches of Gnosticism, the Demiurge was thought of as evil or malevolent because it was constraining the little divine, the piece of God that you are, the spirit of you, the divine spirit, into this physical matter, and matter was, bad and evil. The hollow void, the 4 of Chalices. There are mantras written in Korean to Kuan Yin, the Bodhisattva Kuan Yin. This is an actual monastery, historic monastery in Korea, as an undercurrent beneath the typical meanings that we assign to the 4 of Cups in the tarot, at least the way it's depicted here, and I think actually in the Rider-Waite-Smith originally as well, if you're asking me. There is an underpinning of civil disobedience that could be interpreted out of this card. Civil disobedience based on religiosity. You can see a sense of conscientious objector. I feel like this figure looks like a conscientious objector. And so that was the narrative I wanted to weave into my depiction of the 4 of Chalices. The 4 of Swords depicts an Athenian healing temple, a bit akin to a hospital, but with religious implications. So kind of still has that church vibe that we get in the Rider-Waite-Smith version of the 4 of Swords. You also have Iaso, and Iaso, the goddess, the Greek goddess, is holding an amphora. And this I did not draw. This amphora is an actual historical artifact or archaeological artifact that I wanted to work in. I can't remember the citation or I give you the credit off the top of my head, but it's definitely in the Book of Maps. And while the overall composition of my particular 4 of Swords looks very Rider-Waite-Smith, if you look here, it definitely has nods to the Thoth Four of Swords. The Four of Orbs, the Conservator, picturing Capricornus as a Russian boyar or aristocrat in a palace that will remind you a little bit of the Winter Palace. I believe it's the Jordan staircase. At least that was where I took the inspiration from. I think of the Four of Scepters, the Demiurge card, the Four of Wands, as again that expansion fire energy. It's about having downloaded the creativity and the ideas, the blueprints that are supposed to be constructed into an actual physical structure, the physical universe. So the Demiurge is about building the product, about creating the work product, but you can't keep on expanding over and over, right? So then there's a push at some point where you have to stop. And so I see that stop, the Conservator, as the Four of Orbs energy, the closeout of the fours in this particular, in this realm. I feel like this is a relatively painless and easy card to interpret in a reading, right? This is about holding things that are of value to you, close to you for the time being. The Five of Wands is the story of Jason and Medea being a priestess of Hecate. And here, a little detail, she's holding Angelica blossoms. And Angelica blossoms is a really powerful healing herb, but it's also a poison. And it's one of those, Angelica is considered one of those herbs that you do really need to know what the heck you're doing to work with Angelica. It is one of the more advanced herbs to work with. And so that was a little nod to show how powerful of a priestess she is, or at least that's the symbolism that's there for depicting her holding Angelica blossoms. Another little thing I put in here, which I hope you will remember and keep in mind, is in the Five of Scepters, Five of Wands, the Contender card. The amphora that Medea is holding features the evil eye or the Nazar talisman. And so when the Contender comes up in a reading for you and it shows that you're in a Five of Scepters, Five of Wands type of situation where you are competing in a bit of a zero-sum game, I would urge you to perhaps find for yourself a Nazar Evil Eye talisman just to protect you through the trials that is your Five of Wands moment. Five of Chalices, again, Russian culture, the troubled times, and we see in the background a Rusalka. In the distance, beyond the stream, a Rusalka appears in the waters, larger than life. She wears a blue seraphon. The embroidery and pearls suggest she was once a wealthy urbanite. Her headdress, called a kokoshnik, indicates that she was a married woman and mother before her untimely death. Rusalki are a form of female spirit entities associated with the waters in Slavic folklore. Popularized around the 1800s, the Rusalki started to take on a negative connotation, though prior to that in Slavic paganism, the Rusalki were seen as beneficent, or at the very least neutral. They could be wrathful and malicious toward those deserving of punishment, but could also be called upon to aid a woman who has been wronged. When a maiden dies of unjust causes, especially if it occurred near a body of water, then the maiden's soul became a Rusalka, a powerful water spirit. There's a very strong emotional reason why I wanted this card, the Five of Chalices, the Five of Cups, to be called the Grotesque. It's not that the figure is objectively grotesque or that we're calling this figure grotesque, accusing the figure of being grotesque or labeling the figure as grotesque. The figure has self-identified as being grotesque. Even in the Rider-Waite-Smith Five of Cups, I know it's not the traditional meaning. When you look at the card, the figure who is clearly mourning and cloaked, I've been there, like, haven't you? And when you're in that Five of Cups moment, whatever events led to you being there, having to cloak, feeling like you almost have to hide yourself, like you're trying to hide your face. You feel disgusting. You feel grotesque. You feel ugly. And that's the root. That's the very underlying, hidden, concealed root of the Five of Chalices moment. And I wanted to bring that to the surface and have that be revealed as at the top of the meaning of the Five of Cups, whereas normally it's the underlying driving force of the Five of Cups. So I wanted to call it the Grotesque. The Five of Swords, the Hector, a reference to the Trojan War. So you have Hector on one side, supported by Aphrodite, and on the other side you have Achilles, who is supported by Athena. What's so heartbreaking about the story of Hector and Achilles fighting is that neither even wanted to be there. Neither wanted to take part in the Trojan War. And yet here they were, reluctantly forced to become warriors for their respective sides. This card was intended to be two compositions in one, a foreground story and then a bit of a subplot. And the Trojan War narrative, it becomes the subplot or the underlying story here. So of course, you know, the foreground, you see it's pretty standard in terms of a Rider-Waite-Smith, Five of Swords. And then in the background, it tells you the underlying story, but then it's also the secondary story. So if you read in a more classical way, you still get that like bully kind of overpowering sense in the Five of Swords, the Hector card. But I'm hoping that the secondary narrative of the Trojan War also gives you a sense of everybody's kind of a victim of their own circumstances. Hurt people hurt, right? I feel like that's the underlying theme beneath and holding up whatever's going on in terms of a Five of Swords moment. When somebody becomes that bully, when somebody becomes that agitator that you see in the classic RWS Five of Swords, it's because, as they say, hurt people hurt. The Five of Orbs, the Vagabond. This is one of my favorite cards in the deck. There's so much going on here in terms of layers that are one, occult commentary on Western esotericism, but at the same time, there's also commentary here that's a little bit more personal. Here, as the love and light aspect that I keep on putting into these cards, turning it into a hug deck, right? In the Vagabond, you have Abraham's stone or the stone of Zohar. And the colors, there's 4 colors. They're the colors of the 4 Kabbalistic worlds. Beyond this gateway, beyond this threshold, you have sacred ground, and the sacred ground, a synagogue or shul, here, it expresses the idea built brick by brick that I wanted to convey. And I think it's the concept from Exodus 5, Five of Orbs, bricks without straw. One meaning of this card I wanted to express is bricks without straw, having to produce something without the adequate resources. And yet, as you can see from the final product of the card, succeeding magnificently despite not having the resources to do what you were tasked to do, almost in spite of whoever put you up to that task to begin with. Somebody set you up to fail, but you succeeded wildly in spite of that. Oh man, I need to go faster or else this video is going to be crazy long. Okay, the Six of Scepters, the Six of Wands. Here we have a warrior queen from one of the northern tribes, and on her throne you have Gary and Freki, Odin's wolves. This is a trophy room. If you look all around, there's lots and lots and lots of jars, and each of these jars are filled with oil herbs to preserve a severed head. So the severed heads are the killings. They're also kept and preserved as trophies. So if you compare her, right, to, for example, the Bhutanese princess in the Page of Wands card, the Herald of the Flame, the champion, you get the sense that she was not born into privilege. She was not born to be queen. She seized that throne, didn't she? Whereas the Bhutanese princess in the Page of Scepters card, was born into royalty and is now training to live up to the standards imposed upon her. The Six of Chalices. This pictures the oceanic cultures, and specifically here in Mori, the memory keeper and the diviner are Tahunga. In Hawaiian, they are Kahuna. And the Polynesians, which encompasses the Mori, the Hawaiian Maoli, and many of the indigenous groups found in Oceania, are a subset of Austronesian ancestry, which is what this card depicts. What you're seeing here are people from the Lapita, which is a prehistoric culture from the Pacific Islands going back to around 1600 BC. And I really liked this because there is a migration theory right now that the Austronesians landed in the Pacific Islands through Taiwan. The Six of Swords in the Thoth, I believe the key word here is science, or the spirit is the Lord of Science. Here we have pictured Maria Prophetissima, or Maria the Jewess, who is one of the earliest female scientists. Maria the Jewess was a teacher of alchemy and science in Alexandria, and she often emphasized this alchemical maxim about the union of the opposites. Join the male and the female, and you shall find that which is sought. Male, female, of course, being metaphors or figures of speech. So this harkens back to that idea of the sacred marriage found in Key 6, the Lover's card from the Major Arcana, and this being the Six of Swords. But we're taking a more scientific angle to it, hence the Lord of Science, and also the rational-based essence of the Suit of Swords. The Six of Orbs, the Giver card, is an expression of social justice told through the, I guess, metaphor of Sikhism. Here with depicting the Six of Orbs, Six of Pentacles, and the Rider-Waite-Smith, I kind of stuck with meanings from the RWS, but I also kind of didn't. So in terms of how you would read this, if you are a straight shooting RWS reader, you still do get the sense of disparity between one who is a have and one who is a have-not. But instead of using socioeconomic terms of class, of have versus have-not, here I've translated that into higher versus lower. So you have the higher hand and the lower hand. One hand is the receiving hand, one hand is the giving hand. But I would also argue that it's not clear which hand is the giving hand and which hand is the receiving hand between the upper and the lower. But then the reason I also say it's different is because I did want to talk about social equity and social justice. And so the center composition of the card, the narrative here, the secondary narrative, does show a sense of equality, mutual giving, a bargain for exchange that is equal. The Seven of Scepters. This features a Philippine martial arts fighting style, and it features Kali fighting sticks, but those who know a lot about Kali the fighting sticks and martial arts are going to be like, what? The sticks are only like this big. I know, actually, funny enough, I know better than I should, Anyway, but I made them long, and I took a lot of creative liberties because it just looked better. If they were too short, and this is the Seven of Wands card, at the end of the day, this is still tarot, it didn't look right. It didn't look good. I'm sorry, those who are into Kali Philippine martial arts. I did take creative liberties with the fighting sticks and made them crazy long. Almost into rods, right? Like, which is kind of accurate. I'm sure this fighting style exists. Come on, right? And in the background, you have Apolaki, god of the sun and god of war. I think, again, in terms of interpreting the Seven of Scepters, the Seven of Wands, it's pretty straightforward, I think. When this card comes up, you're probably outnumbered or the odds are stacked against you, but gods are on your side and you're going to prevail. Easy peasy, right? The Seven of Chalices, the Corruptor, an allegorical depiction of the seven sins. You have the wilting pink lilies with the dripping green dew from the Thoth version of the Seven of Cups, called the Lord of Debauch, for debauchery. And so I called this card the Corruptor. In the skies, you're going to see the Milky Way. And I put that there in terms of how I read seeing the Milky Way galaxy there is your ancestors are watching. So how I read this beam of light coming out of the lighthouse is when the Seven of Chalices comes up in my life, the message here is also that a path of light will be shown to me by the gods. The Seven of Swords, the Rogue, is another one of those cards in the deck that I do feel like I ventured a little bit off the range, so maybe I need to explain myself here. The foreground depicts the story of Loki cutting off Sif's beautiful golden locks. So in Norse mythology, Sif is the goddess of plenitude and grains, affinity, fertility, family and marriage, mother of might and magnificence, right? She was also a seer. Loki's trickster's energies here associate him with the element air, hence the suit of swords, with logic, the dialectic, disputes, and argumentation. So here in this imagery, the goddess Sif is sleeping. And so that's a representation of dormant intuition because Sif is a seer. Loki with the sword in hand cutting off her hair. It's in a sense logic, rationalism, and the dialectic striking at intuition and challenging your intuition. And to further underscore that trickster energy that we often read into the Seven of Swords, in the background you have the kitsune or hulijing in Chinese lore. Loki cutting off Sif's hair is also representative of that energy we often read classically into the Seven of Swords, which is somebody who goes off the beaten path, who's a little bit of a rebel. Hence, I titled this particular card the Rogue. So when the rogue shows up in your reading, it gives you a sense that there's like a Loki spirit that is embodied in the situation at hand, or there's that trickster energy that is at play. The gardener, Seven of Orbs. Here I'm working with the allegory of Tibetan subsistence farming. A popular RWS reading of the Seven of Pentacles is that it's that moment of hesitation before harvesting when what's in the bushes is full, fruitful, and plenitude, and it represents plenitude. Whereas I think the Thoth angle of the Seven of Discs, I think it's called failure, and then Mather's keyword for it is success unfulfilled. There's definitely a darker undertone to the Seven of Pentacles, Seven of Discs, Seven of Coins, Orbs, that doesn't necessarily get picked up when people are reading straightforwardly with the RWS. I guess for me, the meaning I wanted to convey with this particular card when I see it is somebody who is a have, somebody who has everything they need. They have access to the resources that are sufficient, but they still feel empty. They feel hollow. They feel sad. They feel disappointed. It's gardening without purpose, not feeling like a sense of purpose. I'm so sorry, my walkthrough is going to take forever. No one's going to be watching this video. It's going to be so boring. Now we are on to the Eight of Wands. The Eight of Wands pictures Athena, Artemis, and then on the aegis, of course, Medusa's head. So there's almost kind of like a triple goddess vibe going on as well, a little bit sort of. And then on the bottom, you see pictured Athens and Sparta. And also, of course, Athena is associated with Athens and Artemis is associated with Sparta. We know from history that Athens and Sparta were rivals, and yet here we see Athena and Artemis working together in collaboration. I think I'll leave it at that in terms of the prophecy that is expressed in my version of the Sharpshooter, the Eight of Scepters. The Eight of Chalices. Here you have Thoth, Tot, Tahuti in the background, and you have at her goddess, the mermaid goddess in the front. One thing I was depicting in the Defector, the Eight of Chalices card, is a syncretization of the Egyptian pantheon with Assyrian or Achaemenid lore, and you see that in Achaemenid lore being at her goddess and Egyptian lore being Tahuti, Tot. This card is signifying the migratory corridors between Eurasia and North Africa. To me, this card is about having invested a lot of emotional labor into something, but then despite it, you make the very emotionally challenging decision to walk away from it. I wanted this card to be called the Defector to underscore how this card is a personification of abandoning one's path to walk a totally different path. So there are a couple different layers of meaning to the concept of to defect, one of them being to abandon or desert what you had devoted a great deal of effort to. So it's that emotional labor I was just talking about. But in defecting, you also have to acknowledge and face the difficult music that all of the previous efforts that you had exerted was for naught. It becomes wasted. It's acknowledged as being faulty and deficient. And so you have to defect from what you previously believed in, what your previous ideology was. Hence, I really wanted to call it the Defector. This is taking me forever. Eight of Swords, the Captor. Here we have pictured Hypatia of Alexandria, and in the background I wanted to depict the museum, that's where we get the word the museum for the muses, and also a depiction of the Library of Alexandria, even though most historians say that the Library of Alexandria wasn't like this one set building, it was more of a collection that represented the Library of Alexandria. And no, she is not blindfolded. What I wanted to do with my depiction of the Eight of Swords is to play on the concept of victim and perpetrator. I think often when we get the Eight of Swords card in the tarot, there's this sense of, oh, I'm the one being imprisoned. I'm the one who is bound. It is me who is the victim of circumstances. And I wanted to play with that idea and say, no, I think mentally we always feel like we're the victim, but I wanted to show that the first person narrative, is the perpetrator, because we are all perpetrators in some way. And I think we liberate ourselves when we stop seeing us as the victim, the one that is bound and chained, and we are in fact liberated the moment we see ourselves as the perpetrator. So Hypatia is not blindfolded because I want you to look at your victim in the eyes and really think about how you are a perpetrator. I know it sounds so like, wow, what is she talking about? She's crazy. This is so heavy. It's not that heavy. I think it's an interesting thought experiment. Eight of Orbs, the Journeyman. Journeyman, journeys, shamanic journeys. Get it? No? Yes? Okay. So here we have a Muisca shaman in training who is honing her craft. She looks like a young child because she is a student in training. And now the background is the Colombian Andes. So again, it's an Andean culture, but now it's in Colombia. So it's way up north versus earlier, some of the Andean cultures, the Inca Empire was down south. So this in Colombia, this is the Muisca. The pugilist meaning a boxer or a fighter, somebody who fights with his hands. So somebody who gets in the ring and basically fights for themselves, right? So that's the concept of the pugilist. And of course, the pugilist is the figure here who is bowing down to Hecate Ereshkigal. Hecate Ereshkigal being depicted more as a crone-like figure to represent that this is a very, very old goddess, hence the hearkening back to Ereshkigal. In the background, we have the city of Uruk in Sumer. Nine of Chalices, the wish granted. We are along the Yamuna River. In the background, you see the Taj Mahal, which is along the Yamuna River. You have the Tridevi. The Tridevi is Lakshmi, so you have the little gold coins to symbolize the goddess of wealth. You have Durga. And if you see, I forgot what the weapon is called that Durga, the goddess, is holding, but I believe that that weapon that Xena, the warrior princess, uses is based loosely on the weapon from Durga. And then you have on the other side, you have Sarasvati. And here next to her is the four Vedas. Nine of Swords, the Haunt. And here we have, again, Hecate, now in mother form. Nine of Orbs, I wanted to try to depict Inca cosmology, which shows the three worlds, the three pachas. So you have the lower world of the earth, so you have the seven rock formations, and you have the human material reality, the K Pasha, and then you have the three generations of women to represent the human material reality or the human world. Then the upper world, the heaven or celestial realm, you see up high the goddess Shaska associated with Venus, the morning star. Shaska is also the goddess associated with maidens, youth, beauty, princesses, fertility, abundance, and dawn and the morning dew. This is a culture from the Inca Empire, and I used the Inca cross, even though the Inca cross is a little bit more of a quote-unquote modern symbol than necessarily ancient symbol. At least that's what I've learned or read. But I put that in there just so that we can anchor the culture of this particular card. This one, 10 of Scepters, Atlas, of course. But here in this depiction of Atlas, I also want to show the concept of multiverses because you have presumably the universe as we know it, the world or the solar system as we know it, that Atlas is carrying on his shoulders in this palace. But then if you look beyond into the back of the card, there's another galaxy there. So it's the idea of multiverses. 10 of Cups, 10 of Chalices, the Joyous One, pictures Matsu, who is a Chinese, Taiwanese goddess of the South China Seas. She's very important to fishermen. She was believed to be a protege of Kuan Yin. 10 of Swords, the Destroyer. This is a Mongolian shamanist. This represents Tengrism, a religion that mixes folk religious shamanic practices with some Buddhism. But it's not Buddhism, it's still considered Tengrism. Complicated, I know, us Asians, right? And then what I really like here is if you look at the 10 of Chalices and the 10 of Swords, this represents North Asian culture, North Asian shamanic culture, and this represents South Asian shamanic culture. And finally, the 10 of Orbs, the spirit of the dynasty, where we are in the Mali Empire, and you see depicted in the background, Timbuktu. And one fun little thing you'll notice if you take a magnifying glass to the background is that the women in the background are wearing saris. They're wearing silk saris. That's right. And so this is to express what I learned, which is that during this period, during the Mali Empire, there was more international trade than we in present day give ancient times credit for. And so because there was a flourishing international trade between, and a lot of cross-cultural influence between Africa, all of the Mali Empire, if you think about that, and India, those who were very wealthy, the wealthy and elite of who lived in Timbuktu would have had access to the fashions of India. And like anywhere you go, what is coming from beyond is always going to be cool and interesting and mysterious and popular. And so saris were popular among the very wealthy and the elite. And so that was a little detail I wanted to put into the background of this card. Oh man, I really rambled for this one. I'm gonna have to see how much of this I can cut.